Yeah, that bell is in honor of Bill Paderak, who donated it, one of the founding members of the UU Society. Welcome. My name's Don Leake. I know about everybody here. I do know everybody here. So you'll get a chance to talk to each other in a minute. We've got a program on uncertainty, one that I requested that Dr. Eileen Korenic present to us, and she's happy to do that. And I'll just say it out loud. I'm going to propose to the program committee that we bring in Eileen every season. So summer, fall, winter, and spring. So this is the summer rendition. Next slide. Oh. Yeah, we're going to test this out again. All right, even though he's not the youngest, Jim is going to come up and light the candle for us, or the flame, and maybe you could recite with me what's up on the screen. In this time of uncertainty, we gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns, as angst closes in upon us. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the dankness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the noble balance of love and community. That's about as certain as we can get. Oh, yeah.
You want to fix the typo and thank Nope, sorry.
Yeah, we checked it. That's how it is in the UUA website, so we went with it.
It counters dankness with warmth, so there is some sense to that. We checked that.
So, of the 6 values that you see up there, I chose transformation as the one most closely related to uncertainty. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages. Never complete, never perfect. So there's some unsteadiness there. We're not locked in. And the reason that I chose, Eileen sent a whole list of programs that she can do. And one of them was uncertainty. And I chose that one because I read a book by Nobel physicist Richard Feynman. Yeah, it's up there. Called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. And Lute, if we get books club started in the fall, that's going to be my recommendation, because it's not fiction, but it is got a lot of UU stuff in it. And I think this quote comes from that book, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. I'll just read it, but I've got to turn around. I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it is much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong. If we will only allow that, as we progress, we remain unsure. We will leave opportunities for alternatives. We will not become enthusiastic for the fact, the knowledge, the absolute truth of the day, but remain always uncertain. In order to make progress, one must leave the door to the unknown ajar. I like that last line. Yeah, Richard Feynman. Okay, time to stand up and move around a little bit and greet one another. Okay, yeah, we can go on forever and ever on that, I know. And we can go on forever and ever in joys and concerns, but we do have to have that. That's a fundamental part of our service. So please come up, drop a stone into the water, and briefly share your joy or concern.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Sort of a concern. I've been prepared every Sunday this summer for kids to come, and I was going to have activities for them, and no kids are coming. I don't know why, but Allison is intent on getting SE going in the fall, so maybe we'll have a more organized program for kids. And my other sort of joy and sort of concern. Wendy and Maureen and I were at a leadership training last week in St. Joseph, sponsored by Isaiah, Minnesota, which is a huge organized social action group, I guess. And I chatted there with a UU minister from North Carolina, young, so full of fire. And you talked to her, Maureen, you talked to her. And basically she said to me, it is so imperative for me to take my church in North Carolina and make it a beacon of social justice in my area. Okay? There's the challenge for you. I'm not going to stop until our church is a beacon for social justice in this area. So I hope people will be on board. We're going to work towards that.
So as Ann said, we were at this week-long retreat training, and during that time I got very clear about the importance of building power in order to create the kind of community where everyone has a voice, everyone is safe and acknowledged. And then I came home, and yesterday I had a conversation with Patrona Melgarejo. Some of you know her because she's spoken here before. And she let me know that 2 more families from River Falls were affected by ice. And she was asked by the wife of one of the detainees to please deliver his passport. He's a U.S. citizen taken by ICE. And she and a couple of volunteers had to travel various places, and they were told, no, go here, no, go there. Eventually, they were able to turn the passport over to authorities. Now, whether or not he'll still be deported remains in question. So that just brought it right back home again. Yes, we have to do humanitarian aid, but absolutely we need to build power. And so thank you, Ann, for mentioning that, because that's where I'm at. Thank you. So as I said, I was there too, a little bit unwillingly, but it turned out to be a positive experience. And I saw in the paper yesterday a picture of a malnourished child in his mother's arms in Gaza. I spent the last week with a lot of Muslims, and they pray 5 times a day, so our schedule was sort of around that. And I remembered what our member here, Colin, from Phoenix, we asked him what the vision statement for his church was. And it was something like, love is the doctrine of this congregation, and the search for truth is our spiritual path. But the one that stuck out to me was service is our prayer. And so with Ann, with Wendy, I am hoping to, I can't commit to 5 calls a day, 5 times a day. But I have been calling, but after the big bad bill was passed, I kind of gave it a rest because no one's listening. But I'm going back to the phones to tell our representatives that it's not acceptable. In this world, kids should not be starving. There should not be a picture in these times when there's an emaciated mother holding an emaciated child. That is wrong.
and we need to do something about it. You got phones too.
Well, maybe we need to expand joys and concerns to joys and concerns and challenges. So here's the big rock for any unspoken joys, concerns, and challenges. Okay, my part is over. So let's welcome Eileen up to the podium here, and she's going to talk about uncertainty in science and art. And this starts out with art. Come on up, Eileen.
Thank you. You know, every time I see a slide like that go up, like Eileen is going to be speaking, my first thought is, I should have prepared something. So I did, you know, so I hope I'm not going to be wasting your time. As Don said, this is about science and art, and much of this is gleaned from a course that I used to teach when I was still working at the university. I'm retired now. As of January. Do I look 6 months retired? Thank you. The correct answer is, why, yes, you look very rested, my dear. But that this is where that came from. About 10 years ago or so, I was struck with the idea that as I was looking through the history of science, and I was always interested in the history of art, it just seemed to me there were these parallel movements. Things would happen at about the same time, as if humanity was just ready for this kind of change in thinking. And as I looked at that more and more, I came up with 12 different ideas of these parallel things. I thought, 12 ideas, 12 weeks in a semester? So that's really how this was born. With the first 2 weeks, we have a 14-week semester. The first 2 weeks were definitions of art and science. So this came out of one of those, and that's the list that I sent to Don. These are some possible talks that I could give. And he said he was interested in uncertainty. Are you willing to give a talk on uncertainty? And my first thought was, I'm not sure. So this is in fact a talk on uncertainty. And I guess we're trying this. This is my first bow to retirement. Oops, sorry. So we're going to start out with the artistic side of things and then move into the science side of things. And it turns out uncertainty really begins, at least in the story that I'm telling here, around about the year 1916. And in 1916, that was really the beginning of the official beginning of World War I. And about 1914 is when Archduke Ferdinand was shot. And some of you might remember, you know, I didn't. I had to look this up because I didn't remember history all that well. But you know, the Archduke was assassinated. And of course, the response is then, we got to get back at them. And they're getting back at us, we got to get back at them. And, you know, I mean, that's how wars begin, basically, you know, sad to say, but that's how they start. And so this idea, you know, with the begin, now I've already forgotten which way this goes. Oh, thank you, I finally figured it out, yay. So World War I begins around 1914, and one of the significant things about that particular war is this is for the first time weapons are being used that don't kill people outright. And you know, as bad as that sounds, if you're killed outright, at least it's merciful. You know, I mean, it's never good, you know, and I'm not saying that, but you know, one must get one death, it's over, it's mercifully over. In 1914, the weapon that they started to use, you know, on the bad guys, was something called mustard gas. And it was called that because it had this very dark brown color. and a dark brown color because it contains sulfur and chlorine atoms as part of the molecule. And sulfur and chlorine are much heavier atoms than normal carbon or nitrogen or oxygen that are normally used in bombs. So sulfur and chlorine in this gas was very heavy, very dense. So when these mustard gas bombs would be dropped, and soldiers would go into their foxholes, which was, standard protection procedure, this heavy, dense gas didn't rise up. It would flow into the foxholes. And it turns out this particular gas dissolves very well in water. So anything that had fluid, their eyes, their nasal passages of their throat, was dissolved in this, and it turned into an acid, and it ate away all of these this lining. So it didn't kill people, but it disfigured them. It harmed them so badly that when soldiers were being sent back home, everybody saw this horrible, maiming suffering for the first time in a war. You weren't getting back, a dead body that you could grieve over. You were getting back a damaged person. And so there was this whole group, and it turned out to start with poets, a whole group of people who were kind of hiding away in Switzerland, which of course was neutral. They were hiding away there, and they thought, this is the problem. Logic got us into this war. This is exactly how it started. They shoot somebody, we shoot somebody. We retaliate. Logic got us into this war. And so the poets started to say, if logic got us into this war, and this is the beginning of the weirdness of this, if logic got us into this war, then logically we should stop using logic. And already, does that not sound bizarre? Okay, but that was the thinking. We should stop using logic. And so this man, Tristan Tzara, who was himself a poet, started a newsletter originating in Zurich, Switzerland, started a newsletter calling mostly poets at the beginning, but eventually it came to media artists as well, starting this movement saying we need to stop creating things that are based on logic. We need to just create things that are absolutely irrational, that make no sense. That's what we need to do. So he started this newsletter, and one of the people who read this newsletter was a poet named Hugo Ball. And Hugo Ball very much embraced this idea of let's not be logical about anything, let's be totally irrational. And so in 1916, Hugo Ball wrote what is called the manifesto for this movement. Let me just read you a little bit of it. They decided to call this movement Dada. They were very careful about this. They did not want to call it art. They did not even want to call it a movement, because that sounds too organized. They wanted to just call it a tendency. And so when he wrote this manifesto, this is what he said: Dada is a new tendency in art. One can tell this from the fact that until now, nobody knew anything about it, and tomorrow everyone in Zurich will be talking about it. An international word, just a word, and the word a movement. Dada psychology, Dada Germany cum indigestion, and Fox paroxysm, Dada literature, Dada bourgeoisie, and yourselves, honored poets, who are always writing with words but never writing the word itself. How does one achieve eternal bliss? By saying Dada. How does one become famous? By saying Dada, till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness. How can one get rid of everything that smacks of journalism, worms, everything nice and right? By saying Dada. Each thing has its word, but the word has become a thing itself. Why shouldn't I find it? Why can't a tree be called pluplush and pluplubash when it has been raining? Now, when you read that now, you think, what was he smoking? What was he smoking? But this was his manifesto. And as a poet, he started to write what he considered sound poems. That is, they were supposed to have no meaning whatsoever. So let me show you one of his. This is a poem called Chimio. This is translated from the German. This is just a brief selection. Can everybody read that for themselves, or do you need me to read it? Everybody is okay with reading it yourself? I'll give you a moment to do that. Everybody to the end? Okay, so when you read this, this was meant to be absolutely meaningless, shouldn't make any sense at all. And yet when you read it, well, it has sentence structure, and it has words that you recognize. And, you can picture your head full of lilacs, and you can picture someone's nose looking like a piano key. It's like not utterly meaningless. You can recognize those concepts. So he decided he was going to go as wild as one could possibly get. He decided to compose things literally called sound poems, where what he did was he obtained bags and bags of printing tiles. Now, if any of you remember the old days of printing, nowadays you type it up, print, easy. In the early days, you had to buy or have little tiles. Every little metal tile had a different letter on it. And you would place it all, in a row in mirror order, so when you printed it, you could actually get some printing out of it. He purchased a bunch of these, and just bags and bags of all these different tiles in different kinds of fonts. Am I doing this the right way? So this movement now became known as Dada. People still are not quite sure where the name came from. There are some people who say the word Dada came from the French word for hobby, which is kind of like, oh, that smacks of some meaning, doesn't it? So maybe not that. From the Romanian, and this is one of my favorites, da literally means yes. So if you say da, da, you're saying yes, yes. But it was meant in the sense that we use two rights to make a wrong now. Yeah, right. You know how you can say two things that are positive and yet it comes out negative? One theory says someone took a knife, they stabbed a German dictionary, and they opened it up to see what was the last word that the knife point fell on, Dada. And the most common choice for interpreting this is it's supposed to be a nonsense word. It's supposed to mean nothing, like what a baby says when they don't even know who daddy is yet. They just make sounds. So that's what he started to compose, what became a nonsense poem as part of this Dada tendency. And we end up actually seeing two different forms of this kind of Dadaist work coming forward. The stuff that was happening in Berlin, as you might guess, where the bulk of the war was, where they were really truly seeing the suffering, very disillusioned images, and they were producing something they didn't even want to call art. They wanted to call it anti-art, because this is not something organized, it's anti-art. But over in New York City, well away from the war, that same movement was still going on. Many of these Dada practitioners came to New York as a kind of a refuge. And so the Dada that they were practicing was a little lighter, a little bit more humorous, some irony. They also called their stuff anti-art. So this is one of the images or one of the poems that Hugo Ball actually put together. Let's see if I can
Is this the video?
Not yet.
On Magic Bishop, if you click on that.
But if you could wait just a moment for that, thank you. So the image that you see there on the right, you can see it's all different kinds of fonts. And that's what he did. He would reach randomly into these bags of tiles and pull out tiles at random, so he was never getting any kind of real word. It was made-up word, no intention behind it at all. And then he would just put all these different fonts together. So every time this got performed, and it was done as a sound poem, it would be performed differently. Whoever was reading it could put whatever spin they wanted onto it. So now if you would go to the video, please. So this is Hugo Ball. and he would read his own sound poems. People would throw stuff at him, all part of the act, and it was supposed to be entirely, utterly meaningless. Now, there are some people who, carried this, I would say, even farther than that. Eventually, it went beyond poetry. It became artists, media artists, who also wanted to get in on making things that were meaningless. And that is mighty hard to do, because you at least got to think of something. You got to think of the idea. So how do you say that's not art if you're already thinking of something? So we see some media artists now coming on the scene. People like George Grosz, for instance, he was actually based in Berlin, so you can see some kind of, ugly images. People are looking, maimed. He's holding a flag there from the Weimar Republic, which is the government that started after the Nazis fell out of power. People are just numbers. They're having ideas poured into their head. So you can see these very dark, frightening images. This, I think, has some meaning. That's very hard to say this is utterly meaningless. But there were some practitioners, including Marcel Duchamp, who became probably one of the most famous ones. This is his piece called Nude Descending a Staircase. Do you all see the nude? Do you all see the staircase? Kinda, maybe. Hard to say, but this is one of his rather famous pieces. There was an artist named Emanuel Radnitsky. He changed his name to Man Ray long before there was a SpongeBob character named that. And one of the things that Man Ray did, one of the famous pieces that he did, was he took an iron. If you know it, like a pioneer iron, you have to heat it in the stove, literally made out of iron. And then he took some iron brads, you can see on there, iron brads, he soldered them to the bottom of the iron. So you cannot use it as an iron anymore, and you cannot use the brads as nails anymore, and called it the gift, where you can't use any of it. This is the classic version of what the Dadaists were going for. Would you click on the next one? I don't know if I can do that or not. Do you all get the ironic? Iron-ick? I mean, literally, iron-ick. And this is what the New York Dadaists were going for. Something a little humorous where people would go, it was supposed to be that. It wasn't supposed to be quite so frightening. It turns out this particular piece was stolen. It was stolen from the gallery where it was being shown. So he made one for this opening of the Dadaist exhibit. It was stolen. Man Ray was so convinced that people wanted this, that they bothered to steal it. He had 5,000 more made. 5,000. Now, he called them replicas, so they may not all have been made out of iron. He had 5,000 made. He was quite convinced that each one was going to go for somewhere between $1,400 and $2,000, because people bothered to steal it. It turns out there was one person who bid through the auction house $450. That was all. He didn't sell any others. And then, somewhat later than that, they realized the cleaning crew at the gallery where this was being shown had thrown it out because he thought it was garbage and didn't realize this was part of the exhibit. So somewhere in the world, there are 4,999 replicas of the gift. There were people like Francis Picabia, for instance, who would also do the same sort of thing, but they wanted to, again, make something that was utterly meaningless. And the way to do that was they would go to a junkyard and they would look for the least interesting thing there. And already, you should be going in your mind, so the most interesting thing is the least interesting thing. The thing that most interests you is that it's not interesting. So he would pick up pieces that were just absolutely junk. This particular piece is basically pieced together sort of like a jigsaw puzzle. He would cut the pieces so they would all fit together. And then he would give it this peculiar name, reverence. What is reverent about that? It doesn't look like anything. And that was kind of the practice. Find stuff in a junkyard and give it some crazy name that has no meaning. It's supposed to be meaningless. It's supposed to have no symbolism, no metaphor. You're supposed to feel uncertain when you look at it because you don't even know what it is or what it's for. This is another piece of his. He called it the child carburetor. Once again, picking up, making it into sort of a jigsaw puzzle thing. But art critics of the time, as today I would go so far as to say, art critics of the time could not help themselves. They believed that their job was to interpret the art that's being shown. Clearly, there's a metaphor here, obviously. And in this case, the art critic who wrote up this particular piece, he said, well, right over here, this, of course, is the symbol of the sexual act. And right over here, you see this circle? That's the migraine that the woman has to refuse him. And it's like, the Dada community was, no, this is to have no meaning. It is supposed to be meaning. There is no metaphor. There is no symbolism. It's like art critics just couldn't help themselves. So we come back to Marcel Duchamp. One of the pieces that he did is something, again, he found these pieces in a junkyard. He found a bicycle wheel that was attached to a bicycle, and he found a stool, and he took the bicycle wheel and he put it through the stool. Now you can't use it as a bicycle or a wheel, and you can't use it as a stool anymore. So it's sort of in keeping with this whole idea. And again, this was supposed to be utterly meaningless. The story is told that he actually went to the gallery where this was being shown, and he went up to his own display, and he took the bicycle wheel and he gave it a spin. And one of the other Dadaists came up to him and said, "Aha! You're doing something with it! Aha!" And he said, "Nah, I just want to see if it still spins." That has no meaning whatsoever. So we come to, now I've been mentioning this gallery. There are a couple of people who actually started this gallery in New York. One of them was named Alfred Stieglitz. I think he looks like Jeremy Irons. That's who I would choose to play him in the movie. Alfred Stieglitz was himself actually a mechanical engineer, but he got very interested in photography. And from a mechanical point of view, he loved playing with the lenses and the openings, the f-stop. For those of you who are into cameras, he was very interested in the engineering part of it. But besides that, he also, and only black and white images were available. It didn't have color pictures yet. So he, incidentally, he ultimately married Georgia O'Keeffe and moved to New Mexico. But this is one of Stieglitz's own photographs. And for a black and white image, look at all the texture that is in that. I mean, that's really quite stunning as a piece of art. But photography was not yet recognized as an art form. It was still considered a scientific thing. Well, scientists mess with the levers and the apertures and all of that. And developing images was very, very dangerous. In order to make daguerreotypes, for instance, if any of you have ever heard of those, daguerreotypes were made on a silver plate. And that practice then went over to silver halide for film. But the practice became, in order to develop pictures well, you would bathe it in iodine vapor, poisonous. And then you would bathe it in mercury vapor, poisonous. I mean, becoming a photographer was a very dangerous thing to do. So Stieglitz considered himself a scientist. Isn't that a juicy name? Stieglitz. Well, it turned out that at the same time that Stieglitz was doing this sort of stuff, there was a man, actually a painter named Edward Steichen. Forgot his name for a moment. Edward Steichen was also doing black and white photography, but he had figured out a way, because color photography was not yet available, he figured out a way to take paints that already existed and add some gel to them so you could paint color onto black and white paintings. So this is a picture of him. You can see there's a little bit of color in that. His more famous piece is this one. A black and white image. He did only 3 of these because he had to paint them by hand. These each sold for $1 million each. I mean, people loved this idea. Well, it turned out Stieglitz and Steichen teamed up. Stieglitz from the mechanical, scientific side of things, and Steichen from the very painterly side of things. They teamed up to start a gallery. They called it Gallery 291. It was located at 291 Fifth Avenue in New York City. And the reason they called it Gallery 291, is because they didn't have a whole lot of money, and that was the address. And the address was already painted on the curb, so they didn't have to pay for a sign. Has anybody heard of Gallery 120 in River Falls? I wonder why they called it that. And you know now where it's located. So Stieglitz and Steichen, started this 291 gallery with the express purpose of allowing unusual art to be shown, things that people hadn't seen before. And so they were very welcoming to the Dadaists. And in many cases showing lots of photography, but also other kinds of art as well. So things were being shown there that you wouldn't have seen anyplace else. So things like Man Ray's The Gift, the iron, things like Picabio's work, that we've already seen. Well, this is one of the pieces that Marcel Duchamp wanted to show in the gallery. And Stieglitz and Steichen, the way this gallery was built, their office was up on a second floor. And they could look down into the gallery, and they would see people walking past this. And they said they only saw two kinds of responses. There were people, they would walk past, and they would look at it, and then they'd just walk on. And there were some people who would walk up to it, and they'd look at it, and they'd go, and they'd laugh themselves silly. And Stieglitz and Steichen thought, some people find this funny, and some people have no reaction to it at all. What's the deal? So they went down and they started interviewing, people who found it funny. Why is this funny? And it turned out the people who found it funny all spoke French. They were either from France or they could speak French. And this is why this is funny. It is called the Mona Lisa LHOOQ. But Marcel Duchamp, as you might have guessed from his name, was French. And only French people found this funny. And that means you have to pronounce these letters the way a French person would. LHOOQ. And if you string those all together, it makes a sentence. LHOOQ. Now, I didn't mean to, I don't want to offend anybody, and Don was kind enough to preview this for me to say he didn't think people were so easily offended. But LHOOQ literally means literally, she has heat in the ass.
Eileen, I cleared it with a men's group on Thursday.
Phew. I will tell you though, the first time I used this, I was teaching this, of course, for college class, and I thought college students are not offended by that kind of language. But I didn't really know if the translation was correct. I got it from Wikipedia, like good or bad, I don't know. But I knew enough high school French to pronounce it correctly. But I thought, I better go talk to the person who teaches French at the university. Now, when I sent this to Don to make sure that it was okay, he had looked it up, and he said, in later life, Marcel Duchamp was himself interviewed about this. Did he really mean that? And it turns out in his later life, he softened that interpretation to mean she is sexually restless. She has a fire down below. It's very much softened, But I took this to the French teacher, and I said, "Is this the correct pronunciation, or is this the correct interpretation? She has heat in the ass." And she said, "You're not going to show this to your college students, are you?" And I thought, well, they're not going to be offended by that kind of language. And she said, "Eileen, let me tell you this. If he really meant she has heat in the ass, the correct phrase would have been à la derrière. Au cul is about as crude as you can get. It is beyond crude. It is an idiom that is street-worthy obscene." And I thought, well, how many of my students actually speak French? Probably not that many. So I just left it. And again, I hope people are not offended. But the idea of this was, it was supposed to be this completely shocking thing paired with an image that lots of people think is one of the best paintings in the world. What a Dada to the rest of the world. I'm gonna make something so filthy and attach it to this, very much revered painting. So that's what it looks like. And again, the Dadaists were very famous for doing these so-called ready-made things, things that already existed, and you just change them a little bit. Just make a little change. But you're supposed to feel very uncertain when you look at it because you don't know how to interpret it. Is this a joke? Is it supposed to be funny? They're not calling it art, and yet it's being shown in a gallery. What are we supposed to do with that? There are some people who actually think that he may have painted this to look like himself. I tried to superimpose his image on top of it. So I don't know if it is or isn't, but supposedly, he tried to maybe make it look a little bit like himself. He also lived his life, though, like that. He would dress up in these various kinds of characters. This particular one he called Eros c'est la vie. That's not a misprint there, double R, because you're supposed to pronounce it Eros c'est la vie, sex, that's life. And lest you think that he was some kind of nut job that people dismissed, he was married to a woman who worked for the U.S. State Department. And in New York City, that's where the UN building is, okay? Her job was when diplomats would come to the UN building, her job was to have them over for dinner parties and introduce them to each other, introduce them to the city. And he would show up, Marcel Duchamp would show up as one of these physical puns. People thought it was a hoot. No, nobody was, angry or upset, or they just thought it was a hoot. So kind of an unusual fellow. And probably this is his most famous piece of all, where again, he took a urinal, turned it upside down, signed a fake name to it. He signed Armut, the correct year. He took it and he fitted it with water so that water was constantly flowing through it. He wanted to show this at a Paris art gallery. And in Paris, they said no. So he took it to the 291 gallery, where they were more than happy to display this. Now, at the time, people looked at that and it's like, well, that's kind of disgusting, isn't it? I mean, a urinal, that's pretty private and personal. 50 years later, the Society of British Artists, 500 members strong, 500 members of the Society of British Artists voted this as the most significant piece of art in the 20th century. Because it forced people to look at something ordinary in a very new way. And that's what they thought Dada is all about. You're not supposed to get any meaning from it. There's no metaphor. You're supposed to just look at it and go, I don't get it, and be left in a state of uncertainty, which was the whole point in the first place. If logic got us into war, illogic will keep us out of war. Oops, I think I went a little too far. And so as people were developing this idea more and more, even as you look at this, still, it's like, somebody had to think of it. Marcel Duchamp or any of the ones that we've seen, they had to think of it. They had to figure out, how do I make this? And that still felt too logical to everyone. So about 10 years after this movement started, there was another group of artists who said, is there some venue, is there some place we can go where there is no logic, where you don't make any conscious decisions, where things just happen and you don't choose them? And we start to see the rise of people like Dali, oops, I keep going past it, there we go, like Salvador Dali, who started painting their dreams, because in dreams there are no rules. You can't control your dreams. You can't tell what you're going to dream. You can't choose that ahead of time. He often tried to induce dreaming, and this particular one, the persistence of memory with the melting clocks, lots of people associate that with relativity. It was not. He had a dream as he was drifting off to sleep. He was sleeping outside, as you might guess from his name, he was Spanish, sleeping outside under the warm Spanish sun, and there's a dish of brie cheese. And as he was drifting off to sleep, he saw the cheese melting over the plate. And he believes that that's what, sort of set him in that direction. He did some weird stuff. He always included a figure that looks like this. He claims that's what he looked like on the inside. He counted that as a self-portrait. And so he included that in a lot of his paintings. If you see that blob, that's him, that's himself. But everything else is supposed to be utterly meaningless. But think about when this is happening. You know, this is now in the late 20s. Dada is over, and people are now looking to their dreams as the place that has no rules. And who comes along about 1925? Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud said dreams are not meaningless. Keep track of them. They are telling you something. They are archetypes. There are patterns in your dreams. He thought these people, who referred to themselves as surrealists, he said they're kidding themselves. They think that there's no meaning. There is enormous meaning in your dreams. You can't believe anything that they do. And you know, so the crazy images that they had, they believed were absolutely irrational. But people like Freud were kind of fighting that, you know, saying dreams are not irrational. So where do you go if you want to have no meaning at all? And so the Dadaists and the Surrealists were kind of stuck where they were. But now, in a parallel to that, right about the same time, around 1914, over in the world of physics, we have people doing some experiments. This particular experiment was done for the first time in 1801 by a man named Thomas Young. It's traditionally called the double slit experiment. And it's kind of a stupid name because the idea of this is that you take a screen, it has two openings in it, hence the slits. This is making it look way too big. This is what we actually use in physics when we're studying slits, okay? And let me see if I can go a little farther to show you. Keep going the wrong way. Good. Yeah, maybe I can't. Over there. So there you get a chance to see what the slits look like. And they are literally made by taking a very heavy piece of aluminum foil, and you literally take a razor and you make a couple of slits. Or maybe you make 3 or 5 or whatever it is that you want to study. Okay? The idea of this, though, is that when you have these slits, something can get through the openings. But between those slits, that's the important part. The important part is over here. You've got some light. Light can get through the openings, but it cannot get through the barrier. And what Thomas Young found as early as 1801, it was hard for him to do because he didn't have lasers to do this, so he had to play with, lamps to be able to get a beam that was pointing in a particular direction. But the idea was you send light through these two slits, and what you get is a pattern of alternating bright and dark light. So I wanted to show you what this looks like for real. I had some pictures there, but so you can maybe see that I'm not, AIing with some fake images. So I brought some slits along, and I got a laser pointer. See how steady my hand is here. Okay, so there's a laser pointer, and it's not passing through any slits. We've just got a single dot. But if I pass it through a couple of slits, I can actually find them on here. You just have to go to my prepared pictures because my hand is not steady enough.
Do you want someone to hold it and move the laser pointer?
I think it's just me not being clever enough to find the spot. Well, I don't want to take your time with that. I'll hope you just believe the pictures. So the idea is you can send light through these slits, and you end up with this alternating series of light and dark spots that look like that. Every color gets spread out a little bit differently, which means if you take one of these and you pass white light through it, it's going to spread colors out into a rainbow. And it's the exact opposite order of the rainbow from what it is in a rainbow. So in a rainbow, you start with red on the top, and it goes all the way through to violet. Do you all know the Roy G. Biv thing? Okay, so Roy G. Biv, when you use something like this, when you use slits in white light, it actually goes in the reverse. It turns out violet is bent the least and red is bent the most. But it still splits them up into colors. Thomas Young was convinced, and he convinced much of the rest of the world, basically based on this experiment, that this proves conclusively that light must be a wave. And it's going through those slits like water goes around a rock. It's going around that barrier between the slits. And when it comes around, some of the waves come up high on both sides, and wherever they're high, they add together, and we get a higher wave. Or some of them are low, and they meet up with another low point, we get a deep spot. Any place that there's that big addition of the waves, we should get a nice bright spot. But if there are places where there's a high point from one and a low point from the other, they cancel each other out, and we'll have a black spot, alternating black or dark and light spots. That is proof, still to this day, that is conclusive proof of the existence of a wave. You pass it through slits, you get alternating bright and dark spots. That's how you prove it. So people started to think about this, because for years, like since the time of Isaac Newton, he had no explanation for it. But Isaac Newton claimed, no, light is made out of particles. Red light, made of red particles. Green light, green particles. He did no experiments to prove that, but he was the one talking about that. So now Thomas Young comes along, 200 years later, and says, I have proved light is a wave. But there's a big difference between a wave and a particle. And the big difference between them is what we're looking at here. If you have a wave, you can't really say where it is. It's spread out, so you can't say, oh, the wave, right there. No, it's some of it is there, some of it is there. You can't say exactly where it is, but you can say very well how fast it's going, because you can measure that. That can be measured with detection devices. But if you have a particle, and Einstein was the one who came up with an experiment to consider that light might be a particle. The experiment that he proposed is, suppose you take a metal plate and you shine light on it. And if you shine light, electrons will jump off. You can catch them in a detector. Well, the experiment that was done was you shine red light, nothing happens. Keep shining that red light, nothing, nothing, nothing. Green light, nothing. Blue light, nothing. You're going through all the whole rainbow of colors. It wasn't until they got to ultraviolet light. You shine ultraviolet light, electrons jump out immediately. Einstein said, that's because this proves conclusively light is made of particles. And you can treat those particles like little marbles. Like this is a game of marbles. You come in with a big old honking marble made of ultraviolet, and you can shoot it and electrons come right out. If light were a wave, you could shine all the red light you want, and you keep shining it, and the electron should know, I'm feeling it, oh, finally come out. But it doesn't come out. No matter how long you shine that red light, it has to be a big old honking hunk of marble that actually kicks the electron out. This is what Einstein won his Nobel Prize for. He did not win it for the theory of relativity because people thought that was too out there. We're not going to give a Nobel Prize to something that might be disproved in a few years. So this is what he got his Nobel Prize for. But now we have two pieces of conclusive information. One that says light is absolutely a wave, absolutely, because there's no other way to get alternating bright and dark spots. Light is absolutely a particle because there's no other way to get electrons to jump out of a metal. So if it behaves like a particle, well, we know right exactly where it is, but now we don't know how fast it's going. All we can say is it's right there at the moment. Could you make it go forward? This is not doing anything. Okay, so Werner Heisenberg now comes along, and look at the timing of this. The late 20s once again. Dadaism and the uncertainty of that is kind of fading away to give way to surrealism. Now it's showing up. Uncertainty is showing up in physics, and so Heisenberg comes along, Werner Heisenberg, and he puts this uncertainty, this light particle, light wave idea into just one law, and he says there are some things you just can't know equally well. Now, this looks pretty fancy like this. What I'm asking you to take a look at here, this delta sign, that little triangle, that means uncertainty. So this is saying there's some uncertainty in where it's located, uncertainty in momentum, which basically translates to uncertainty in speed. If you have some uncertainty in both of those, you multiply those uncertainties together, you'll notice it does not come out to be 0. Now, I know Don is a professional mathematician, but the rest of you, even if you don't think of yourself as being very mathy, is there any way you can multiply two numbers together and get 0? One of them, at least one of them, has to be 0, right? Werner Heisenberg said it will never be, this is a constant, it will never be 0. It's a very small number, but it will never be 0. That means if you try to measure anything about light, there will always be some uncertainty in where it is or how fast it's going. You don't get to know those exactly. Yeah.
How do they quantify uncertainty status?
It's a, sort of a peculiar, this ends up being a very peculiar unit. It's kilogram meters squared per second, which is like nothing physical. But let me give you an analogy, and then maybe this will show up a little bit better. So the analogy is, think of a fan, okay? When the fan is not running, can you tell me where any blade is? You can say, right there, blade number 1, right there. Do you know anything about its speed? It's not running. You can't say anything about its speed except, well, 0, but that's not really very interesting. So now I start up the fan. Now I can say exactly how fast it's going. I know the speed. I can tell you that in RPMs or whatever speed you want. But now I want to say, where's the blade? You can't say with certainty where the blade is. And that's how the measurements are made for uncertainty experiments when it comes to particles. They measure what is the likelihood of this thing, of a particle being right there. And it's like, well, I know what the wavelength is associated with that light, so it's probably plus or minus that wavelength. So it's sort of like that. You sort of look at, and in the early days, that was exactly how people looked at it. What is the limit of your measurement? How good can you measure something? How good can you measure the wavelength of light? How good can you measure where a particle is? And there are screens that do that. They're called scintillation screens. When a particle hits a screen, it glows. And you can say exactly where the particle is. For years, people had this very kind of gross analogy where they wanted to say people have, or that things have this particle wave duality. We don't really know. There's the uncertainty of that. We don't really know. So they would talk about a person riding a wave, like on a surfboard. And as long as they're riding the wave, boy, you can see all the wave properties. But as soon as they hit the dock, bam, scintillation screen. Now you know right where they are because there's the blood stain there. And it's like, oh, ew, but it's like the thing contained wave and particle all at the same time, and you only get to see what you're looking for. You're looking for waves, you pass it through a slit, and you look for alternating bright and dark spots. You're looking for a particle, you use a scintillation screen, and you look for a single dot. Both of them are there, both of them exist, and you don't get a chance to see both at the same time. When Heisenberg first introduced this idea, even physicists of the time sort of mentally attached, you don't get to measure both position and speed yet. We're not clever enough to think of that yet. We don't have good enough equipment yet. And Heisenberg said, no, this is a principle of our universe. It doesn't matter how clever the scientists get, and in 100 years, no one yet has, and I don't think they will, because you can't. How do you come up with an experiment that can measure both wave and particle properties? They're completely different animals. You can't measure those in one single experiment. And people have tried, but as soon as you stick a detector in there to say, where's the particle? Well, now you know where the particle is, but you don't know where the wave is anymore. There's a very old joke that has been going around, and now you all will, I'm sure, get it. The joke is, Heisenberg is riding along in his car, and a cop pulls him over, and the cop says, Dr. Heisenberg, you were doing 90 miles an hour. And Heisenberg says, great, now I don't know where I am. So Heisenberg said, this is a fundamental principle of our universe. It doesn't matter how clever, it doesn't matter what the design, there is no way to measure both wave and particle properties. You have to live with both in your head. And you will always have some piece of information missing. You will always be a little bit, or maybe a lot, uncertain about how light works. Well, in the 1940s, people got this grand idea of, for years, we thought, okay, Newton said light is a particle. He gave us no proof. Now, Einstein has proof. Yes, light is a particle. But wait, Young said light is a wave, and we have proof of that. Well, are there any other things, like if we had something that we know for sure is a particle, like for sure, electrons are particles. We know they travel through the wire and they give us electricity. But if we had something that we thought for years was a wave, is now showing particle properties, is it possible that something that is a particle can now show wave properties? And what is the test to prove something is a wave? Slits. Got to pass it through slits, right? But electrons are pretty tiny, so slits like this are too big. And they figured out, what's the right spacing for slits? The spacing between atoms of a crystal. And so they took a beam of electrons, they passed it through a sodium chloride crystal, and this is the image that they got. Alternating bright and dark spots from particles, things we have always thought of as particles. Particles passing through the slits that are the spacings between atoms shows alternating bright and dark spots. Particles have wave properties too. It's not just light. And so we are now left with this. This is the state of physics and also the state of art. Dadaism and surrealism maybe not so comfortable for people anymore, except for historical reasons. But in the world of physics, this is what we now live with. And that lovely quote from Feynman right at the very beginning that Don read for us, that's where we live, in this state of, I don't really know. And in a very similar quote, and I think it was Feynman actually did it in an interview, he said, I love to say I don't know, because that tells me where to start. And I thought, oh, that's good. That's really good. And I would always tell that to my students, because so many of them, especially the physics majors, are very embarrassed to say, I don't know. I don't understand this. I don't get it. And Feynman said, that's where you start when you say, I don't know. That tells you how to get started. So in case you didn't know, thank you. And if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take those. And I don't want to go over time. It's already 11:40, so I don't want to use up your time too much. Yeah.
Well, I won't take up too much time, but the time went fast, so it didn't feel like a lengthy talk. Just from the history of mathematics, concerning the beginning of your talk about World War I and the logic that started it, and the illogic that was the reaction. The ancient Greeks put everything on real numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, solid numbers. And then they realized that there were fractions that existed. So they said, that's okay, because that's just a ratio of real numbers, integers. But they used logic to prove that not all the numbers were rational, and like pi, e, some other famous square root 2. So they called them irrational numbers. So the rational, using logic to develop irrational, is sort of a parallel to the development of God.
Oh, yeah. And weren't there some consequences, though, if you believed in irrational numbers? You were shunned in some way?
That the Pythagoreans threw a guy off the ship because he believed in irrational numbers. That was before they proved it.
Oh. Well, that's just crazy. And just for my own edification, I guess, did any of you see any images, in particular among the Dadaists, that you would actually have in your home as a piece of art? Yeah? Really?
Oh, I know exactly where
I liked the one with the coloring that, the painting, painting with the blue and the green and how
Oh.
it looked like a pond or something. I like that.
Oh, oh.
I like the photograph of New York City in the snowstorm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, you were talking about the moonlight one, right? Yeah. But yeah, that one in New York City, for being a black and white or sepia tone film, or a piece of film, you know, what interest there is in that. You know, most of us, we sort of expect to see color images now, and it's like black and white could be very fascinating. Mhm.
I really like the whole overall theme of uncertainty. And I think we're all feeling a lot of uncertainty these days. And one of the things I realized over the week was that certainty is always an illusion anyway. What we do have is whatever is right here, right now, in this moment. And so then the question is how to show up.
And even the present moment has uncertainty in it. You know, that was one of the questions. I used to have a physics teacher who was also something of a philosopher. And she said, you know you're real. You can tell yourself that you're real because there's constant chatter going on in your head. You know, I mean, that you're just there's always something running through your head. And she said, you just have to take it on faith that I'm doing that too. You know, you have to believe that I believe I'm real. Or are you all that there is? And, you know, Rene Descartes, you know, the famous mathematician, that was one of his big deals. Are we all real? Or am I just the only one who's real? I'm a brain in a vat, and I have invented all of you. And there is no way to prove that any of you are real.
And in the world of AI, that it's real.
Yeah, oh yeah. But so I trust that you are all real. I do believe that.
And there is a real bread and snacks in the kitchen.
Well, it doesn't get realer than that. Thank you very much.
We just have a few slides to end.
Oh, sorry, just turned it off.
Oh, well, can you advance? Yeah. So here are the announcements. You can read them. Just lately, Paula's memorial will be on August 9th. That's a Saturday from 1 to 3. And a couple of nice talks coming up after that. I attend Hope for Earth meetings, and Mark Clappage Matthias is one of the co-leaders of that group. So, yes.
Gardening, there's quite a number of items in the kitchen, please take them. There's also mint, dill, cilantro, and many more peas in the garden. Please help me spread the wealth. If you can't use them, but know somebody who might, take things and share. And feel free to come to the garden anytime, not just on Sundays, and do things. It's just fun. That's what it's there for.
Thank you, Garden Subcommittee. Do you want to mention your weed project?
Thank you. Because we have a memorial service coming up, and I don't know if anybody pays attention but me, you know, the stones that are around the perimeter of the church grow weeds. And I've kind of been responsible in recent years for cleaning out those weeds. And to me, it always looks nicer if there aren't weeds growing out of the stones, but I'm tired. So, does anybody want to join me? There are 4 sides to this church. Claim a side, and at some point before August 9th, you need gloves or you need a claw, and you just claw the weeds out, and then the stones, we look neater. We look like we care about our facility. So, if you're willing to help, see me.
Yeah, we'll provide the gloves and the claw, and I've got dibs on the west side. That's the front, okay?
You don't want to do any side in the sun.
No.
It's really hot.
So I'll do that in the morning. So, yeah, if you can help out that way, one side. Yes, Anna?
It's very interesting. We're going to do
Yeah. So the story behind that is, yes, she at one time said that. She said at another time, well, whatever my family wants to do. And the family decided it will be just sort of like a visitation. I like the way Ann put it, memorial gathering. So people will come, maybe share some stories, maybe not informally, not formally, and there'll be some treats. And thank you for bringing that up again. I'll coordinate that. So we're looking for bars and other things that you could bring. The sister that's coordinating it lives out in California. I'm not sure how much help there will be, but we said we would provide some sort of treats, and there'll be more details to come up. All right, next slide. I'm not sure our beat slide changer is very good. Yes, there's coffee and banana bread, at least. Next one. Let's close it out. See if we can make a circle here.